Welcome back to the ISS Brief Podcast, where we explore how sustainability is being applied in practice across organisations. In this episode, I speak with Colin O'Brien, Sustainability and Operations Manager at Croke Park, one of the largest and most iconic stadiums in Europe, home to the GEA, and the host to some of the world's biggest sporting and entertainment events. With sustainability journey spanning nearly 2 decades, from simple energy monitoring to science-based targets, biodiversity initiatives and supply chain transformation, Croke Park offers a compelling example of what long-term operationally embedded sustainability looks like in a high-profile, high-footfall venue. In this conversation, we explore what sustainability means in the context of major live sports and events venue, how Colin has built the program from the ground up, and what it takes to drive real change across a complex, multi-stakeholder environment. So if you're not in the event space, you're going to get some really, really good tips, particularly around that multi-stakeholder space. Hope you enjoy. Colin, look, thanks a million for your time today. It's great to have you. A couple of questions here I'll run you through, so we might as well jump into it. Croke Park's, I suppose, one of most Ireland's recognisable institutions, stadium that, as we were discussing obviously prior to the call, Ireland finals, championship games, international concerts as well. I know Coldplay played there last year, NFL games and kind of everything in between. Can you give us a bit of a sense of the scale of the operation, and where sustainability sits within that operation in itself?
Yeah, of course. And thanks very much, Niall, for having me on. It's great to chat to you. But most people will be familiar with Croke Park, but I suppose the scale of the operation and what we do behind the scenes, probably most people wouldn't be fully aware of it. But yeah, on any given year, we welcome sort of between 1.5 and 2 million visitors a year. Across sporting events, concerts, meetings and events, and we have a GAA museum as well. We've been getting probably busier each year. We started welcoming a lot more different sports, more diverse events, I suppose, to the stadium, such as the NFL that you mentioned there, soccer, and soon boxing. So our first boxing event was our last boxing event was back in 1972, Muhammad Ali. So it's good to have another boxing event now this summer and welcoming Katie Taylor here. It's good to put that ongoing saga to bed and finally be able to host that event. So yeah, look, we're much more than a GAA stadium. We obviously still put Gaelic games as a priority, and everything else is built around that. But yeah, ultimately we're a very busy venue every day of the week, and yeah, sustainability is, I suppose, embedded in all of that. It's in our culture, it's ingrained in our day-to-day operations, our whole event management processes, our procurement, our social agenda. It's second nature really to us now, and it's a big part of our brand. And I think most people who visit us, who work with us, who work with us as part of not just our own staff group, but are contracted out to work with us as part of our day-to-day operations, our events, will realise how much sustainability is embedded in all of that, really,
Mm-hmm. And so your role is interesting, and I suppose we've seen this across, the sustainability space, let's say the last 18 months, particularly with some pushback on ESG, sustainability regulations, and how that's kind of changing some businesses' approach to how it does, how it approaches sustainability, and I suppose the shrinking of, say, sustainability themes, and particularly the role of that being more so cross-functional, going into the operational facilities. And obviously your role spans both that operational side, the facility side, but particularly on the sustainability side. And I think, that approach tends to have really good impact, because, you know deeply, I suppose, on the front line, how things can change and how you can play a role and making that connection across to the bigger piece. So I suppose, how does that combination in your own role help you, I suppose, in a way you approach the program, I suppose putting it at, like I said, the engine room of those 2 million visitors every year,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very much on the ground. So yeah, like you say, the engine room. And when I say I'm in the engine room, I mean quite literally. In a lot of organisations, I suppose, sustainability usually sits in a corporate communications office or in a marketing department, and that looks great on paper, but it's often disconnected from reality. And so I suppose because my role spans facilities, stadium operations, and then sustainability, obviously those worlds, I suppose, are completely intertwined. They're fused together. So I don't just sit and write the policies in the office. I have to physically implement them. in the plant rooms, in the waste areas, in the service tunnels on an event day. So that's where the real magic happens, I suppose, when it comes to my role. Having one foot in facilities means you approach sustainability with almost like a builder's mindset. You stop looking at carbon reduction as this abstract concept, and you start looking at it as almost an engineering challenge. How do I change things? How do I redesign things? Systems, processes. And when you're trying to figure out how to switch something like a stadium's backup power systems from traditional diesel, which we've done recently, to hydrotreated vegetable oil or HVO, you can't just be a sustainability theorist. You have to understand the engines, understand the fuel lines, understand the logistics of a match day. You need to be deep in the engine room, and ultimately you need to understand the risks involved, because if it all goes wrong, it's on my head, it's on me. So that's where I suppose you really need to understand how your policies, how your procedures are going to make an impact, and ultimately the risks involved. But I think it completely changes credibility too. When I talk to the wider operations teams, the contractors, the cleaners, I'm not coming at them with, I suppose, a checklist of rules from an ivory tower. I'm coming at them as someone who understands their pain points, their pain points on the ground on an event day during the week, because their pain points are my pain points too. We're all trying to solve them together. So, being in that engine room means you design programs, sustainability programs that actually work, under pressure as well. Forces you to build practical solutions, because if a sustainability initiative compromises the stadium's operations on a match day in front of 80,000 people, well, then it's not really a sustainable solution at all. We're looking at the bigger picture. If it's a case of, it's a good sustainability initiative, let's just implement it. It has to tick so many other boxes from an operational point of view, a cost point of view, a health and safety point of view. So, sustainability doesn't always just win out on its own. There's lots of other factors there to take as well.
Yeah, I think that's, like, you made a good point. It has in the past fallen into this, strategy for strategy's sake that sits in the drawer, doesn't become livable. And similarly as well, reporting for reporting's sake, and in essence, businesses just become a reporting entity rather than actually making change. And like you said, it's really those being on the front line, who, with people like the cleaning teams that understand the impracticalities of some solutions, and then as a result of that, you can rethink, re-engineer a sustainable solution that will work, and not something that just seems like a good idea because whatever. And I suppose that's the interesting side as well, and making that connection between this isn't just a strategy or a reporting piece. There's actually levers we can pull to have an impact here.
Yeah, exactly. You're on the ground every day talking to different teams.
Yeah.
Getting their feedback. You can't just write a policy on your own. You have to get feedback from all the different teams. Like that. What are your pain points? What's your challenges? What do you think is going to work? And then you're implementing it with them. You're seeing it firsthand. Is this working? Is it not working? What tweaks do we need to make? And you're weighing up the risks as well. And you're going, well, look, are the risks too big here? What are the risks of this not working out? It's very much a team effort, and everyone has a part to play, not just writing the policy, but implementing it then on an event day as well,
Yeah, and we found as well, similarly in that regard, like those individuals who are at the front line tend to have the most, I suppose, where the innovation comes from, bottom up, really.
Yeah.
You can lay a strategy, but they're the people who are understanding how it's going to be actually practically implemented, and need that insight.
And that's part of how we build our culture as well, is by getting everybody involved, getting them to understand the processes, the procedures, getting them involved in change. When they see it happening then on an event day, when they know they had an input into it, everyone had an input, that helps to build the culture, and it keeps the momentum going, I suppose,
Yeah. Because that's one thing you did mention there is risks. And I think that's one thing just even to be good to chat about, is particularly for people who, and again, the whole point of what we're trying to do in this podcast is chat to a range of people from a range of sectors, try and share and kind of make this, as you said, not an abstract theory piece, but more so bring it to life.
Yeah.
So people might have considered, sustainability challenges you face. Obviously, with the 2,000 visitors you have a year, there's obviously, for a major venue, there's obviously big impacts associated with that.
Yeah.
So in your world, I suppose, when you're thinking about and you're mentioning those key impact areas, the risks, potentially where those opportunities lie. Could you give us some example of that or flavor just from your world, you know?
Yeah, well, I suppose when people think about a massive stadium, they come in and they're looking at the floodlights, or they're looking out at the pitch on the game, at what's going on, and rightly so. You know, they shouldn't be noticing anything else really. That people aren't coming here to think about what's the carbon impact of what's happening here. You know, very few people will think about that, but they're here to enjoy themselves. But in my world, I suppose we look at the stadium as a massive sort of living organism. When the stadium's full, we have more people here than there would be, I think, in 8 of the counties in Ireland. You know, so it's like a large city or a small county, really, when you put it that way. So it's really like operating a large county, yeah, or a small county, if you want to put it that way. So if you want to understand the challenges, I suppose, the risks, the opportunities of running a major venue sustainably, it really sort of boils down to 3 or 4 key areas: waste, energy, and our supply chain, and probably the fourth, if you want to include our water usage in that. But waste is probably one of the first areas we focused on, and one of the biggest areas still for us. So on a major match day, like, you have over 80,000 people coming through the stile. So in the space of just a few hours, they generate literally tons of waste, everything from plastic bottles to food wrappers to cardboard packaging. And I suppose the immediate risk there is operational, I suppose, failure or operational paralysis, as well as the environmental impact. If you don't have a flawless, really robust waste management system in place to segregate that waste in real time, you know, if you don't do that, you fail, and it's very hard to get back on track, you know. On a busy event day, the busy venue. I suppose the opportunity we seized was turning that risk into, I suppose, trying to set a standard, not just for ourselves, but other venues, you know, by mapping out every single waste stream that we have. And we probably have 10 to 12 different waste streams now when we break them all down. And then we transitioned, I suppose, into a zero waste to landfill model. It's not really a phrase I like to use too much anymore, because we don't really operate landfills in Ireland anymore, you know. But I suppose back in 2008, when we started really trying to segregate our waste, we were still using landfills, and that was the ultimate goal, was to get away from landfills, you know. But every single scrap of waste that we have now is recycled, it's composted, or it's converted into energy. So that's something we're proud of. That took a long time, obviously, to get to that, you know. Energy then is another one. So energy consumption is a huge one, and the climate risk associated with that. You know, stadiums like ourselves, we're energy giants. And again, like I said, it's like a small county when we're full. So if you think about the amount of energy that we use on an event day, when you turn on the massive floodlights that we have, power the kitchens, the big screens during the winter when we heat all the meeting spaces, the hospitality suites, all at once, that energy spike is huge for that couple of hours that the event is on. So the risk there isn't just the financial side of things, it's the carbon impact as well. So I suppose we've heavily invested in energy efficiency projects over the years, and we continue to do so. Building management systems, transitioning our backup power systems away from diesel, like I said, to HVO, and ultimately just trying to focus on building a stadium that can run efficiently when it comes to energy under those peak operational stresses, when there's a concert on or an All-Ireland final, for example. You have that 2 or 3 hour surge, really, where everything's running at its maximum, you know, and you really need to be operating as efficiently as you can. And third one then I mentioned is our supply chain, or that hidden, invisible one that people often don't see, but we certainly do see. You know, there's a huge impact there. You know, the stadium doesn't exist in a vacuum. You know, it's hundreds of contractors, suppliers, partners, vendors, all part of what we do. You know, the risk there is in the Scope 3 emissions, so the carbon footprint embedded in the food, the beer, all the burgers and pints that we sell on a match day and on a concert day. The materials brought into the stadium that we don't directly control. The risk there, I suppose, is also our greatest opportunity. By setting the strict procurement guidelines that we have with our suppliers, with our contractors, and we try to not just influence what we do here, but across the entire market, really, things like implementing our 50-mile menu for our corporate catering, requesting more circular packaging from our suppliers, not just trying to make our own venue more sustainable, but all the other venues that our suppliers work with. We're trying to drive sustainability across the entire events industry, which is important, I think.
Yeah. I suppose as we chatted about this as well, so because obviously your journey kind of started around that energy management piece, which makes sense because operationally, as you said, there's a big energy demand within the venue for not only the big match days or concerts, but also, as you said, like that short spike when it be meetings and setting up, particularly on kind of the winter mornings or winter evenings, even when people are looking at the Croke Park and seeing it closed, but it's not actually, it's operating internally. What has been, I suppose, how has the program evolved from that point, and what moves made the biggest difference? And one area I think would be good to balance on as well is, and I know we discussed about this, is the area of the expanded area, particularly around biodiversity, pollinator friendly plants, etc. Because they're particularly things people probably don't see or would associate with Croke Park as well. So I'm always intrigued to understand the thinking behind that as well. How does that fit into your broader program too?
Yeah, the biodiversity. I suppose, again, if you're one of the 80,000 people here on a match day, you're probably not looking up at the walls looking for swift boxes or bat boxes or pollinator friendly planting in our car parks, And if you are, it probably tells you how poor the game is. But to us, I suppose those hidden details are just as important as the energy stuff, the floodlights and the energy efficiency projects. I think behind the biodiversity stuff, really, I suppose it's right within our identity. Croke Park is a massive concrete infrastructure. It sits right in the heart of an urban residential community. So we have a responsibility not just to be a good neighbour to the people living around us. We place a lot of emphasis on the local community, obviously, but the local ecosystems as well that shape the space around us too. And urban biodiversity, you see it a lot more now and you hear about it a lot more. It's under massive pressure. So a big venue like ours, if we can provide a sanctuary for local wildlife, local biodiversity, then we absolutely should. So that's something we've always been quite aware of. But I suppose from a strategic perspective, these initiatives fit into our broader program probably in two ways, materiality and then engagement. So if you look at the modern sustainability frameworks like CSRD, which we would have looked a lot at in the past couple of years, talks heavily about materiality, as you know, which basically means looking honestly at your total impact on the environment. And for a long time, I suppose, businesses only focused on carbon and waste, energy, things like that. But today, biodiversity loss, it's a critical global risk. You hear about that more and more every day now, about endangered species and things like that. So by actively managing the biodiversity at the stadium and around our campus, we're ensuring that biodiversity is fully integrated into our environmental management systems, sitting right alongside our energy and waste targets and our waste and our energy goals, really. But I think the biggest thing for us with the biodiversity stuff is it's an incredible tool for storytelling and culture. It can be hard to get people emotionally inspired by talking about our energy certifications or an energy audit or energy efficiency programs. Not many people can instantly relate or connect with that. But when you tell staff and you tell visitors, when you tell people on the museum tours or even corporate clients that we have active beehives on our tour farm producing local honey for our catering, for our stadium menus, or that swifts come back to the stadium each year to nest in our stadium walls, it immediately sort of makes sustainability tangible. It sparks a completely different kind of pride and really hits home with people. People sort of light up. They want to know more. They want to walk around and see where these things are in the stadium. So being able to tell a story that connects with people is massive for us, and we always try and find ways to do that. Like I said, it can be difficult to connect people to energy projects, to water projects, to Scope 3 emissions. It's really difficult. So biodiversity is great. And yeah, like I said, it might seem smaller, it might seem invisible compared to the scale of the stadium, but it's a real goal or a real part of our program, you know. It proves it as well. Sustainability isn't just about doing less harm by cutting carbon, you know. It's about actively doing more good by giving back to the local environment.
Yeah, and I think like that's something that's definitely shone through in terms of looking
Yeah.
and working with you and looking at what the Croke Park is doing and the work you're doing is the holistic outlook you guys are taking, but not only from a practicality business sense, but connecting that to also the community and social connection you guys
Yeah.
have with the venue that it is, the connection with
Yeah.
the Irish culture, you know, and also I think, you know, like you said, every business from a materiality perspective or an impact area needs to look at biodiversity because of how intrinsically linked it is with, you know, the climate crisis
Mhm.
and taking action on that alongside the other pieces. And I
Yeah.
think like again, back to the program and how you're doing it, like one thing that shone through is how ambitious you are from a target and goal setting perspective across those areas. And obviously none more ambitious than, you know, your science-based target initiative. You know, you have obviously a near-term target, 50% reduction by 2032.
Yeah.
You have your long-term target by 2050 and 90%. That is one area we get a lot and work with a lot of businesses on as well as around that SBTI piece, you know, either
Mhm.
getting their decarbonisation science aligned or looking at the SBTI
Yeah.
framework and getting it verified. And I suppose it's great to understand, you know, what that involved, you know, how it meant for you in terms of setting priorities, decisions day to day. You know, insight on that's always useful as well.
We officially signed up to the SBTI probably around this time last year. So I think April or May 2025, we were officially, our targets were officially approved. So yeah, signing up to the SBTI, I suppose that was a big moment for us. I suppose it was the moment we stopped setting goals based on what we thought we could easily achieve and started setting them based on, I suppose, what the planet actually required us to achieve. That's ultimately what the SBTI is about. So I think it holds us more accountable, you know.
Mm.
But getting the targets validated by the SBTI, it isn't just a matter of signing a pledge and then putting a logo on your website, which a lot of these frameworks are, you know. A lot of frameworks out there, and they're all great for different types of businesses. But this one's fairly intense, highly rigorous process, and certainly not for the faint-hearted, I'd say. It's quite a complex process to go through, and not that it's a downfall of it, but I think it could be streamlined a lot more. I think they are trying to streamline it a lot more, make it a bit more easier for organizations to go through the process, because it is very, very arduous going through the whole process, you know. It's probably a 6-month process in total, really, back and forward with SBTI on numerous calls, going through our carbon data in really, really high detail, you know, and questioning everything. And yeah, there's a lot in it. But yeah, we had to do a deep sort of forensic dive into our entire carbon footprint, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, covering the entire value chain, really. Everything from the embedded carbon in the food that we serve to how fans travel to the stadium. But they actually don't include fan travel in the SBTI standard. It's an optional category that we can include, but fan travel obviously makes up, on a busy year for us, up to 90% of our scope 3 carbon footprint. So I think we were obviously going to include that, you know, just to be as transparent as we could. But yeah, the SBTI takes all that data, essentially puts it under the microscope, and at the end of it, they essentially say, look, if the world is going to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, here's the exact trajectory that your stadium or your business must follow. So it's not up to us to decide, it's up to them to tell us, look, this is the impact you're having and this is the change you need to make to play your part. So for us, like I said, that meant setting a massive 50% reduction by 2032, based on a 2022 baseline year, and a 90% reduction by 2050. So look, I think if we were to set our own targets, they wouldn't have been too far off them anyway. I think they align pretty well with the national targets anyway. Quite optimistic, quite challenging, but we are we are hopeful that we can reach them. But in terms of day-to-day decision making, I think it's where it's had the biggest impact. It strips away the greenwashing and hugely changes how we prioritize things like our capital investment. You know, it means every single operational decision now, or every single investment has a carbon price tag attached to it. So before SBTI, for example, if we were looking at upgrading a piece of plant equipment or machinery, the conversation was usually dominated by, you know, the traditional business metrics of what's the costs, what's the financial payback period. You know, it was always the first question. And today, I suppose that the first question that's asked now is, how does this project align to our carbon reduction pathway? You know, how is this project going to help us to reach our SBTI targets? You know, but yeah, don't get me wrong, that the cost is still a huge factor. Because we're still a business at the end of the day, but it's not the sole deciding factor anymore. You know, a lot of our projects, a lot of our investment now, the SBTI goals and targets are taken into account whether that project is going to be viable or not. You know, which is great to see how sustainability is changing things. You know, when it comes to investment and some priorities.
Yeah, and it's interesting there. I think the piece on transparency. You know,
Yeah,
like that obviously is a hard to abate category for you within your scope 3 in terms of your fan travel, and obviously you can probably pull levers in terms of communication programs and more public transport services when available, and working with Dublin City Council and stuff on that,
yeah,
which I'm sure you are. But like as you said, it's getting that transparency is key, and I think the big piece we are telling people as well is, you know, again, don't let, you know, your biggest, I suppose, bones in your closet, you know, don't be afraid to show them, because I think it's good to show the imperfections as well. And like, yes, we're not there yet, but we're trying to get there, you know?
yeah, exactly. And as well, the SBTI, they don't treat businesses on their merit or as an industry, that they view all businesses as a whole, I suppose. You know,
Mm.
so fan travel. People traveling to and from the businesses aren't recognised, you know. But for a large venue like us, it's huge, you know. Whereas some other business, it might be minute, but yeah, fan travel makes up like 90% of our carbon footprint. Like I said, we've limited impact on what we can do there, and yeah, we are talking to the government bodies, with the transport authorities, with the local councils, things like that, just to make them aware of the impact that our events have in an area like this, you know, and seeing how we can improve it. There's a big mindset shift to be had there, I think, when it comes to people traveling more sustainably. But yeah, for us, it's just about being transparent, gathering as much data as we can on this area, and telling people about the impact. And then look, trying to find ways to reduce that, whether that's just through engaging with people, and trying to not preach to people, but just trying to make them aware of the impact of traveling to the stadium has, and more sustainable options that they can make. But it's a problem a lot of venues have, and probably the biggest challenge that all venues have is trying to tackle their area of travel to and from the stadium, you know, or to and from their venue.
Yeah. Because the other piece then as well in that, which is interesting, and you mentioned, is the obviously ROI, and that similar piece now, you know, dependent on the individual. So oftentimes you might be talking to a sustainability lead who's maybe
Yeah,
reporting into the CEO, CFO. They want to see the return on investment, and it really depends on that individual, be it the team, the senior leadership team, what mindset they have when it comes to sustainability. Do they see it as a something just they should do, but look, it's not top priority, or do they see it as as an intrinsic part of the strategy they need to do, and it's driven by a vision in that? And like you said, the thinking there is around, you know, this is good for us longer term from an opportunity perspective, but also mitigating those risks, and therefore not only the cost needs to be involved in any of these decisions, but also
mm,
the the sustainability impact of any of these decisions. And obviously they go hand in hand, but it's moving the conversation beyond that cost conversation oftentimes.
yeah,
And one thing that kind of flagged in my mind as well was, you know, and it was interesting, particularly just in obviously the business you're working in with sustainability, is like you mentioned around those sustainability credentials, you know, becoming more and more a deciding factor, particularly
mm,
with international clients, you know, if they're choosing a music venue for a conference or
yeah,
an event or whatever it may be. And it's just, yeah, it was just interesting because it's, you know, it's a new landscape, but again, it shows not only having that leadership buy-in from a business sense, but you're seeing more and more it's actually supporting you from like generally winning more business and probably retaining more business longer
yeah.
term because of the actions you're
Mm.
taking. So can you speak a bit about that, and you know what you're seeing, and I suppose how it is kind of supporting you from a business commercial sense, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. And probably from a concert point of view, Coldplay were probably the first artists to ever sort of come to the venue and put a list of tick boxes on the table that we needed to check if they were to come and play in our venue, you know. And they were pretty strict sustainability guidelines that they wanted us to meet, which was refreshing to see, you know, because no artists have really done that since. And we good to see that a lot more in the music industry. It's like we see a lot of different artists coming to the venue here, and sustainability is last on their priorities, you know, and it can be really hard for us to sort of put any of our good sustainability measures back on them, you know. But Coldplay was great in terms of pushing it back on us to look, if you want to win our business, you want us to play at your venue, these are the things you want to do. And that was things like eliminating single-use plastics, things like being able to show them our carbon footprint, being able to promote more sustainable travel, things like reducing waste, using circular products, having water refill stations around the stadium. And to be fair, we were probably able to tick off 75% of what they wanted, and then the rest we just needed to make some small adjustments to how we operated. But yeah, it was great to see that. But I suppose more broadly across the board, yeah, it's won us a lot of business in terms of certainly our meetings and events side of the house. It's won us business, you know. It's completely shifted from being a nice to have option for the venue now to a non-negotiable. So especially for the major international corporate clients. Like if you look at the corporate landscape today, massive global companies, you know, the big tech giants and what have you, financial firms that we host here at the stadium for exhibitions, conferences, week-long seminars and what have you, they have their own strict ESG targets now, carbon budgets that they need to hit. So when these organizations plan a multi-day conference or a seminar, exhibition for thousands of their delegates, whether they're coming from the UK, the USA, around Europe, they're not just looking at the stage, the AV, the hotel rooms, which they traditionally only looked at, you know, they're looking at the carbon footprint of the event itself. So they're asking questions of me, if we bring our event to Croke Park, is that going to damage or enhance our own sustainability targets, you know, the broad question. And that's great, you know, I love it when they ask these questions. Because like we've been on this journey for nearly 20 years and we can give them an answer they can actually trust. So when a client pitches to hold their event with us, we aren't just telling them a nice story, you know, we're giving them verified data that we've built up over numerous years. We can show them our ISO 2012-1 certifications for sustainable event management, as well as our other ISO sustainability certifications for environmental management, for energy management. We can show them our waste systems and our records, our paperless meeting spaces, our smart building controls. I think the ultimate game changer, which I touched on earlier, for us commercially has been our food innovation. We partnered with Aramark about 2 years ago. Aramark are a catering partner. We partnered with them to launch 50-mile menu, which has won international awards for sustainability and innovation. So it means we can look at an international or local client in the eye, and we can tell them every single ingredient served at your event was grown, harvested or produced within 50 miles of this room. All working with local suppliers within 50 miles of Croke Park store. And we can even provide a carbon footprint score for their menu as well. Full carbon footprint of their event, of their food. This is what I believe and the wider stadium team believe sets us apart from many competing venues. And yeah, look, people love it. International clients, local clients, national clients, they all love this type of thing really when they come and view Croke Park as a potential venue. And yeah, it's definitely winning us business for sure.
That's like I know you mentioned at the start as well, like supply chain being one of your major impact areas, one of the major areas you've always looked at. And I know similarly from that, you know, I suppose customer lens, you have that information, but also from a supplier lens, you know, I know you're beginning to apply sustainability criteria into those, you know, tenders, the likes of that Aramark kind of partnership that would have obviously gone through, you know, and viewed their sustainability credentials, what they could provide, because that's, you're looking beyond cost. And again, I know you're setting targets of like 85% of your suppliers to adhere to these sustainable kind of your sustainable supply chain policy by 2030. And again, I'm sure that fits into your SBTI goals and everything floats up like that. But you know, it's interesting as well to get your viewpoint on how that looks like in practice and one area as well we hear from bigger buyers that are kind of having these requirements is balancing that tendering process with what smaller suppliers can do. So you're not cutting them out completely, and then the
Yeah,
bigger suppliers who may have more information. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear, the kind of requirements, how you're supporting the smaller businesses, but also, what that whole
yeah.
process looks like in practice.
Yeah, so look, when you look at our carbon footprint, a massive portion of it sits in the scope 3 emissions, so about 90% of it. And again, a large part of that is made up from fan travel, but the rest is essentially sitting in our supply chain. So ultimately, that's all the embedded carbon and the goods and services that we buy from the external vendors, external contractors. So if we're serious about hitting those SBTI targets, like you mentioned, we have to use, I suppose, our purchasing power and to try and create change there. In practice, I suppose it means sustainability is no longer, the bonus question at the end, tucked back at the end of your tender documents. It's heavily weighted now, right alongside things like price, the cost, the reputation, quality of the product, operational capability. So we put out a tender or even a basic facilities contract, whether it's for a facilities projects or a new cleaning supplies company. We require data essentially. We ask suppliers to demonstrate their own carbon reduction initiatives and their packaging waste management. Their sustainability policies essentially. Do they have environmental policies? Do they have biodiversity policies? And their path to net zero? What's their plans there? Any sustainability certifications they have? And only recently, probably in the past 6 months, we've sort of built in how they protect workers' rights under modern frameworks like human rights impact assessments. Big part of our ISO 2012 sustainable event certification, they're placing a lot of emphasis on human and children's rights in that. So how are we monitoring our supply chains in terms of, are they protecting their workers? Are they adhering to all the human rights frameworks that they should be? So again, there's a lot of sustainability credential in all that I've just mentioned. It's up to suppliers to demonstrate how much of that, if any of it, that they have. And yeah, ultimately, they're going to earn points. They're going to get them closer to earning a contract with us. It's going to get them a lot closer towards doing business with us if they have more of that than none of it. But yeah, when you said there, how do most suppliers respond? It really probably falls into two categories. Like for most of the large businesses, the multinationals, the national businesses, it tends to be business as usual, really. It comes as no surprise to them. They're seeing this a lot more now, not just from us asking them. Lots of businesses are asking them for this now. And they probably have a dedicated sustainability manager as well. So again, they're speaking my language, I suppose, and they can hand over a polished sustainability report in 5 minutes, along with all their certifications, their credentials, their strategy to achieve a net zero or whatever, That makes my job easier. But I suppose for the smaller local suppliers, which to be fair, most of ours are, it can probably initially look daunting. And 5 minutes after sending them an email, they'd be ringing you, and you probably know straight away what they're ringing you for. They hear terms like validated science-based targets or materiality assessments, and they start to worry. They start to worry that they're going to lose the business with us, or they're going to be locked out of the market, not just with us, but with other businesses, But our approach, with the smaller companies, it's never about, I suppose, penalising them or telling them, look, you can't do business with us. It's about bringing them on the journey with us, really. Look, we recognise that small, family-run supplier might not have a dedicated sustainability manager. They don't have the resources or probably the expertise that Croke Park has or other large businesses have. So instead of demanding flawless sustainability reports off them or policies, all we look for, I suppose, is a commitment and transparency around where they're at, and asking them practical questions, I suppose. Are you willing to eliminate single-use plastics from your deliveries? Can you source your materials more locally? How can we work together to optimize things like deliveries? And to cut transport emissions, that's one thing we do a lot with a lot of our deliveries. Is work with the company to say, look, do you have to deliver to us 3 times a week? Can you deliver to us twice a month instead? Just trying to sit down around the table and brainstorm some ideas, and then talk to them about, look, this is what we need. This is how we can work together to get you there. But I think what I find as well is the smaller companies are actually more open and more flexible to change, to learning. Once you take the corporate jargon of the SBTIs and the net zeros out of the conversation, and you actually just sit down with them and talk about practical operational changes, which is that's all it is really. When you take the jargon away from it, it's trying to streamline operations really. They adapt quite quick and faster than the bigger companies, because I think they really rely on our business a lot more, and they really want to work with us. No one wants to lose a contract with Croke Park, and everyone wants to win it, So the great thing is, I think by helping these smaller Irish businesses, you win or keep a contract with Croke Park, you're actually making them more competitive to win business elsewhere as well. So that creates a massive positive ripple effect, with the local economy. And I'd love to be able to measure that or put data on it, just to see how not just Croke Park helping smaller suppliers, but all large companies helping small suppliers, how that ripple effect really affects the local economy and helps the smaller companies to grow in business.
What's been really interesting here is like you said, is actually viewing this from a tangible perspective and just nearly stepping back, taking a breath and moving away from all that jargon and just looking at sustainability from like, right, what are the practical, operational actions we can take that are going to have an impact on and improve from an engineering nearly perspective, improve how we operate as a business, but also have an impact and improvement on our environmental and social aspects of the business, and similarly potentially have more sustainable ways of operating that are going to have an impact similarly from improving, winning more business from a commercial perspective, saving costs, etc. And I think that's been really, it's been a great chat from that regard, because I think a lot of people can struggle with that kind of concept, And as you said, just speaking to people straight up about what can be done practically to actually, and what that's going to have an impact on from a carbon perspective, moving away from the SBTI net zero kind of jargon piece. A couple of final questions for you, and I can ask them both at the same time, and you can kind of answer this. So obviously, Croke Park's been on this journey for 20 years, so it's been kind of ingrained in terms of how it's building and moving forward. Like, what does that program? Where does it go from here? What are your priorities, let's say, in the next 5 years? And then similarly, for people who are listening to this, who are in that kind of role, you're in maybe in a business, an event, in a venue, a bigger business that's starting on this, overwhelmed, don't know where to start. What's kind of one piece of advice you'd give them as well?
Yeah, next steps, I suppose, we're really focusing on the transition to renewable energy. We really need to invest in that, trying to get away from gas, get away from the fossil fuels. We're looking at things like implementing heat pumps, solar, battery storage, big energy projects, ambitious projects, as well as reducing our overall energy demand. But really looking at the renewable energy source and how we power the stadium that way. It's a huge one really for us. Then Scope 3, which I talked about, the majority of our emissions sit there. The fan travel piece is one we're really eager to. We talked to a lot of other venues. We network with a lot of other venues trying to tackle this piece. We'd love to be able to come up with some sort of a program or initiative, not just on our own, but with stadiums around Ireland, around Europe, to really tackle the fan travel piece. Working with the relevant authorities and the government bodies on that. I think there's good work to be done there. Like we just spoke about, we're working with our supply chain to bring them on that journey with us, reducing emissions across all of our supply chain. So look, nothing too out of the ordinary there. Big focus on energy, our supply chain, and then the fan travel piece. It's where our biggest impacts are. So I think if you can tackle those areas, we'll make a good dent in our SBTI targets. But yeah, the other half of your question there, for people who might be a bit daunted setting out in this area or a bit worried, you can feel a bit overwhelmed, I suppose. If I could sit down over a coffee, I suppose, with anyone who was feeling overwhelmed, and look, I feel overwhelmed quite regularly when you're sitting down to look at your carbon footprint every year, or you're looking at your SBTI targets. I think the number one piece of advice would be not to try and be perfect or to take on too much. When you try and be perfect in anything, you'll never reach it.
Yeah.
Don't take on too much or compare yourself to other businesses, other venues that are in the same industry as you. I think comparison is the thief of joy, as they say. But yeah, just start with the data that you have. Start right where you are with what you have. When you look at Scope 3 emissions, or you look at a massive tangled web of hundreds of suppliers like we have, it's very easy to, I suppose, feel a sense of, Jesus, what have we signed up for here, You look at these massive carbon accounting frameworks and you think, I don't even know how to track this, let alone fix it, So, but the hard reality, I suppose, is look, nobody has flawless data. No one has flawless Scope 3 data on day one. Even years on, we still don't, We're dealing with, I think, incredibly complex carbon categories when it comes to our industry and our venue. So, look, you're trying to do your best. They're not completely flawless. You're just trying to improve year on year, That's ultimately what it is. You're looking to improve year on year. But starting off, look at your finance or your procurement ledger and identify probably the 2 or 3 biggest areas where you spend the most money or generate the most volume of product or whatever it is that applies to your industry. And whether that's with your catering partner, your waste contractor, whoever they are, go and talk to them as well first. Try and pick up the phone to them, sit down with them and just start the conversation, And again, like I touched on earlier, don't come at them with the compliance stick or the carbon jargon and say, look, we're on a journey. We want to map out our carbon footprint and we want to work with you on it. We want to understand yours and we want you to understand ours. And what can we change together ultimately? Me sitting down with our top 2 or 3 suppliers and looking to see what can we change, what can we do better. That's where the biggest impacts are had, And you'd be amazed then really how quickly things can change and how easily things can change once you start those conversations with the people who have the biggest impact on your business. That fog starts to clear, the overwhelming feeling starts to clear. And yeah, once you just start focusing on a few practical real world relationships, with those 2 or 3 people that you work with, get away from the spreadsheets, get away from the desk. I'm lucky to really have good relationships with a lot of our contractors, our suppliers, that we can sit down over coffee, have a really open chat casually. Again, leaving the spreadsheets behind, and we didn't build our strategy overnight. We didn't get to where we are overnight. We didn't get to the science-based targets overnight. This is, like you said, took us 20 years really of continuous incremental steps, day after day, year after year. So I'd like to think in another 20 years when we look back, we'll be miles ahead of where we are now even, So I think every sustainability program started with one simple initiative. That's what we did 20 years ago. So narrow the focus, I think, pick your top impact areas and just take that first step. And then you'd be surprised how quick the momentum can take care of the rest.
That's brilliant. Colin, look, thanks a million for your time. That was a really fascinating conversation. And look forward to hearing how you progress continually on this journey as well at Croke Park.
No, thanks very much. No, great to chat to you. And hopefully people can take something from what I said there. Thanks very much.
100%. Cheers. Thanks again. Have a good day.
Cheers, man.
That brings us to the end of this episode. A big thank you to Colin for sharing such an honest and practical insights into what it takes to build and sustain a genuine sustainability program at one of Ireland's most iconic venues. If you found this episode useful, you can explore more practical insights, case studies, and resources from the Institute of Sustainability Studies.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.